Welcome everybody to today's session. We are going to focus on a bold economy, a bold future for a circular bioeconomy. And I'm really excited to host this session today. My name is Catriona Power. I'm the VP of Partnerships and Strategy at Foresight Clean Technology Accelerator. We are really pleased to have Natural Resources Canada sponsor this session as well. We'll be joined by a great group of panelists from across Canada who work with government, SMEs, investors, also with industry, very importantly, who will discuss the opportunities and challenges in scaling up the circular bioeconomy and how it can enable low carbon growth. On our agenda for today, we'll do a quick overview of the circular bioeconomy. We'll then move into opening remarks by the Assistant Deputy Minister, Beth McNeil, from Natural Resources Canada, Canada's Forest Service. Then we'll move into a panel discussion for 40 minutes, and then we'll have a moderated Q&A facilitated by myself. If you have questions at any time, please put them in the Q&A box. Thank you. So before we begin, I will just give a quick overview of who Foresight is and the work that we've been doing in circular bioeconomy. Foresight is Western Canada's clean technology accelerator. We work with industry, technology providers, investors, academics, and government to help scale clean technology and biotechnology to reach our low carbon goals. We do this by breaking down silos, bringing stakeholders together, working on projects to accelerate adoption of solutions and support their investment. Why are we focused on the circular bioeconomy? Well, it's a growing opportunity. It's projected to be a $240 billion market in Canada by 2030. And what we're seeing is this mindset shift. And it's a growing mindset shift that we've been seeing over the past, 5 to 10 years. All of a sudden, there's growing demand for renewable and natural-based materials and bioproducts, moving away from fossil-based. For example, there's an increased uptake in bioplastics, whether that's for packaging or whether that's also for automotive and vehicle manufacturing. And we see large corporates like Biochemicals, like Ford and IKEA and Unilever and many others make high-level commitments to how they can support renewable-based materials within their products. What this presents is a value-added opportunity for traditional sectors like forestry and agriculture, and even marine-based industries across Canada. And the good news is that there's already a lot of multiple advantages across the ecosystem here. There's a number of research institutions like UBC Bioproducts Institute, as well as accelerators, across Canada who are breaking down silos. However, complexity does still exist, especially if we are looking to scale circular bioeconomy to enable low carbon growth and meet our net zero commitments. For example, there's a number of applications and products out there, but they do have different applications like automotive, construction, packaging, cosmetics, and textiles. And the value chain for these products are not from early stage bioproducts all the way up through the value chain. They're not necessarily built out yet. And so we have a job to do in creating these value chains and making sure that Canada has a value add opportunity here. As well as that, there is complexity in the fact that some products and concepts are currently in the early stages of their technology readiness level. So they might have, and they face commercialization challenges, whether that's investment or connecting with customers. And so it's our job at Foresight through this project to support the connections with these customers, end users, intermediaries, and others. And so as part of our ecosystem growth, what we're working on is engaging intermediaries and end users to help scale solutions. And this is an identified gap from across the, we talk to all the other accelerators and researchers and also industry. They're looking to understand how they can connect the dots from policy to procurement, but also explore what it takes to support capital into the space, either from venture capital or banks to invest in the bioeconomy. Now that it's becoming more of a player in the sector and it's becoming more of an investable opportunity, how do we make sure we tell that story? And so on the panel today, we have a number of different folks who work across either talent or markets or capital and policy, who can speak to some of the challenges and highlight what's going on and what's next to move the needle. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it to our moderator today. I'm so pleased to have Beth McNeil, the Assistant Deputy Minister from the Canadian Forest Service from Natural Resources Canada, who's going to lead the panel through the discussion. Thank you, Beth.
Thanks very much, Catriona. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour, bienvenue. Catriona, can you hear me? Yep, great. Thank you for inviting me to moderate this panel. I'd like to thank both Foresight Cleantech Accelerator and my federal colleagues at Export Development Canada for helping to organize this panel during EDC's Clean Tech Week. I want to recognize as well my colleagues at the Canadian Forest Service at Natural Resources Canada who've been working tirelessly to showcase opportunities to advance the commercialization of bioeconomy innovations developed right here in Canada. I'm excited to be here moderating this panel. I must say my deputy minister was very intrigued by the title, Bioeconomy, Roadmaps, Rebels, and Real World Challenges. Pretty catchy. And I see that it's attracted already close to 70 people to join us. And this will bring together investors, innovators, industry to explore commercialization of innovative products and technologies in Canada's forest bioeconomy. As Assistant Deputy Minister of Canada's Forest Service, I've seen firsthand how the forest sector is changing and evolving to continue to meet the needs of Canadians and the challenges we're facing today. By designing products with a plan for how they can be cost effectively reused or repurposed and striving for 100% efficiency in the resources we harvest, the circular bioeconomy of today is aiming to provide sustainable choices to all communities in Canada and throughout the world that will help us overcome some of our greatest challenges. This has already started, and an example is the Government of Canada's compostable bioplastics and biofoams challenges, which will bring us innovative and sustainable products such as compostable coffee pods and insulation. Forest biomass is being used in biocomposites for manufacturing lightweight materials used in vehicles and a structural component in wind turbine blades. It's all part of Canada's circular bioeconomy advantage. Smart investment opportunities, world-class research and innovation, jobs that support our communities, and products and services that are nature-based solutions to our environmental challenges. Going forward, we need to utilize these competitive advantages to strengthen the bioeconomy innovation system, attract global industry and investment to scale up bioproduct development, and put Canada on the world stage. And on December 3rd, we're going to do just that. At the World Circular Economy Forum side event, we're calling the Reverse Pitch, Closing the Loop on Circular Bioeconomy Innovation. This event will offer a forum for impact investors and industry leaders to present their challenges and connect with the best of the Canadian bioeconomy research and innovation ecosystem to get to solutions they could see themselves invest in. To set the stage for that meeting, it's my pleasure to moderate this session today with a great group of panelists so we can better understand the bioeconomy investment landscape and ultimately to understand what it'd take to see scaled up investments materialize for the bioeconomy. Joining me today, I'm pleased to welcome Tammy Houston. We see Tammy's name there. She just waved. Global Account Director, Cleantech at Export Development Canada. EDC is Canada's export credit agency with a mandate to support and develop trade between Canada and the world and to help Canada's competitiveness in the international marketplace. We also have Gurminder Minhas, Managing Director of Performance Biofilaments. Performance Biofilaments provide sustainable nanocellulose additives that deliver significant enhancements to such products as concrete, mortars, cements, foams, protective coatings, industrial fluids, and other advanced material and specialty chemicals. Thirdly, we have Shirley Speakman, Senior Partner at Cycle Capital. Cycle Capital is a clean tech venture capital fund manager that partners and invests in companies fostering a sustainable future. And fourthly, Neil Huff, Vice President of Business Development at FP Innovations. FP Innovations is Canada's research and development organization specializing in creative solutions to accelerate the growth and enhance the competitiveness of Canada's forest sector. So with that, I'd like to dive right in. And we have one question to start off with, and I'd like each of the panelists to take a crack at answering this question. How do you connect with the investor innovator ecosystems across Canada? And what do you seek from these relationships? Gurminder, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Thanks, Beth. Well, traditionally, what we've been doing in the past, again, pre-COVID times, was going to industry conferences. We've been lucky that even the last couple of years, the activity level in sustainable materials has been quite good. So there's a handful of industry conferences that happen every year, both here in North America and in Europe. So we attend those, and we actually meet basically industry champions, company champions that are looking for technologies such as ours, and that's worked quite effectively. Those, since COVID has happened, have obviously been shut down. But I think some of the organizations have done quite well in converting those to online sessions. So I find myself just as busy, if not busier, attending virtual meetings and doing the same thing with respect to business development. And primarily what we're seeking with these is, again, to partner with companies that want to have the innovative and sustainable solution brought into their process. So joint development agreements are something that we look to seek. More of a long-term opportunity to get some of the material that we're producing into supply chains of these various companies.
Thank you, Gurminder. Neil, what would you say to that question?
Well, thank you, Beth. So first of all, we don't bump into many startups or VCs in this sector right now. We'd like to do that more, of course. Typically, we focus on governments, on our forestry company members, and on the market players in the value chain, the brand owners and the value chain participants. And the forestry companies are excellent at capital investment and scale and making it all efficient. The market players and the brand owners, for the most part, are mainly looking for new products that are cost effective and environmentally friendly, but aren't necessarily looking at participating in the development of those new products. And governments are great early investors to help reduce technical and market risk. But while sometimes they invest, they're the only investor in the early stages. Typically, they want and require industry investment as time moves on, and so it's very, very important that we kind of start that discussion, because I'm sure there's a place in the middle, in kind of that innovation hole we've got in the middle for VCs and young companies. So I'm really, really looking forward to having that conversation with people like Shirley.
Thank you, Neil. And we'll turn it over to Shirley.
Thank you very much. And Neil, what I'll say from the outset is that you and I have to talk. So that's great. Because what we try to do, obviously, is the cycle has a presence in Montreal. I'm the presence in Toronto. We have a partner down in New York. We try to work our networks at the end of the day. So, every time I'm out in Vancouver to meet companies, I stop in at Foresight, try to make sure I connect there. I connect with the accelerators here in Toronto. We have our presence in Montreal, as well as out east. So it's important really for us to rely on our networks and to continue to nurture those relationships, and hopefully to bring alpha to our investors within our fund, so that because of that, we have unique insight and hopefully unique access to very innovative technologies. One of the challenges is we're a Series B fund, so there are certain conditions that we need to see, as every investor does. But definitely, I love to nurture early relationships and then be ready and able to snatch it up when it's ready.
Thank you, Shirley. And I'm going to repeat the question because people may have forgotten it before, and then I'll turn to Tammy. So the question was, how do you connect with the investor and innovator ecosystems across Canada, and what do you seek from these relationships? So over to you, Tammy.
Good. Thanks for repeating that, Beth. So I would say very similar to Shirley. It's really about networking and knowing the people within the ecosystem. So we do work with many of the VCs across Canada. And have some of those investment relationships around the world as well. I'd put in a plug for some of our other partners within the Cleantech ecosystem within Canada. SDTC in particular is certainly a very good funnel for EDC. A lot of the companies that SDT is funding end up being companies that we will work with as they move through their TRL levels. So I think SDTC is a very good kind of breeding ground for companies that we like to watch and that we'd find are going to be commercialized. Maybe one other comment that I would just make on that question too, and not so much with respect to the Canadian landscape, but one of the things that EDC does as well is really to try to foster some of the relationships that we have internationally, and many of those strategic players that we're working with, in many sectors around the world have innovation teams. And so they're always scanning and looking for new and innovative companies that they can be introduced to. And I'm always interested to hear, each of those are a little bit different in terms of the stage that they'll go in, but some of those companies are interested in working with very early stage companies that they can bring along. So I think, as we're trying to pair up those, early stage companies with, those companies that can help them scale, there are interesting relationships that we can take a look at to help that happen as well.
Great. Thank you, Tammy. And I'd remind folks that we do have a chat feature. If you'd like to post your questions, Catriona is going to moderate a Q&A session towards the end, and I'm going to make sure that there's plenty of time to do that as moderator. Gurminder, I'm going to ask you a more pointed question. And the question is, from an SME innovator perspective, what are the challenges you've come across in bringing new bio-based technologies to the market? Do you have some lessons learned, and what advice would you give to those that are looking to follow in your footsteps?
Yes, well, one of the key challenges that commercializing biomaterials that we're dealing with is that the commercializing these materials does take time. It doesn't necessarily just apply to biomaterials, it applies to materials in general. We've all read the case studies where, for example, it took carbon fiber 20 years to become somewhat commercial, and another 10 years after that to become widely used in aerospace. So this is a very technical fit. So for us, we're looking for the same thing. We're looking to develop a very technical bio-based material. So it takes time working with some large companies, both establishing a technical value proposition, a commercial value proposition, and also demonstrating that the fact that the material is safe. So this requires a lot of patience, perseverance, and persistence. So the process takes time, and one of the key, learnings and messages is to make sure that your shareholders, your customers, and your team, more importantly, understand that the process is going to take time, and we have to stick with it.
Thank you. I'm just writing some of these. It's a different 3P there that you presented to us, with the patience, yes, perseverance, and persistence. Thank you. Shirley, a question for you. It's somewhat different. From an investor perspective, what key trends and hot topics in bioproducts are you looking for? And what characteristics in particular are you interested in seeing in a project?
Absolutely. So, as Gurminder's alluded to, it's a very, and same with Neil, it's a very dynamic space. So there's absolutely a lot going on. I think what's been particularly intriguing for us at Cycle is a lot of this innovation and trying to keep on top of it. But one area that we're finding particularly interesting is on the fuel space, the biofuel space, and how many companies are actually using waste streams as opposed to the first generation, which, sugar or so we're moving to waste forest products to help facilitate the biofuels. But in combination, I think the stat now is that products are combining 55% of bioproducts that are being created are also looking at biochemistry, so the chemical side of it, as well as the fuel side of it. So I think that's an interesting development because as Gurminder has pointed out, this takes a lot of time. And if you could get a couple of horses in the race, then you're parallel processing and reducing the risk. That being said, sometimes they're two very different, the teams that are required to process and develop and be persistent and patient are two very different teams because the technical needs are different. But I think that's a really interesting development that we're keeping our eye on. From a company perspective or an investee perspective, I think one of the largest challenges is the incumbents and being able to understand where the product fits relative to the incumbent technology that's being used. Understanding what the performance criteria of that the customer need is, whether it's price competitive or not. I think that many customers want to understand that they can actually make a shift in their supply chain and not face undue risk. So those are all the type of things, and there's a whole slew of more, but those are the type of things that we consider and think about when we're making an investment.
Great. Thanks very much, Shirley. Question for Tammy. As an executive with Export Development Canada, you have a bird's eye view on trends in the marketplace. Which areas of the bioeconomy expertise in Canada do you see international companies expressing the most interest in?
So thanks, Beth. It's a very broad question, of course, and so I think what we see is that different countries are certainly at a different stage in their bio journey. So we like to look at what some of our clients are doing in the space and where they're getting traction. Because it is such a broad sector, Shirley mentioned biofuels, and we're certainly seeing a lot of activity in that sector. I would say certainly companies interested in kind of building out biofuel facilities, but they do take time and capital, and so some of those innovations I think are more challenging to deploy because of the capital required for those. Maybe I'll touch on the ag sector because of course I think within Canada we certainly have a lot of expertise and value to bring within that space. So, I think we see ag tech solutions certainly having a lot of momentum, and I'm sure Shirley sees that a lot in the frothiness of the investment environment as well. So valuations for ag tech companies are certainly growing and maybe beyond beyond reach in some cases, but ag tech certainly has a lot of momentum, and I think interestingly there they do tend to be a lot less capital intensive, so can be deployed a lot more quickly as well. So I think we're certainly seeing a couple of a number of Canadian companies within that space that are seeing very good momentum. One from here, of course, in Vancouver that has had a lot of attention would be Semios Bio, and within the Prairies, Farmer's Edge, just to name a couple of them, but certainly a lot more within that space as well. So I think, really what they're doing is being able to sort of meet the needs of the producers and consumers to produce food in a much more environmentally sustainable manner. The kind of carrying on with the ag theme, I think, so much interest within alternative proteins and plant-based diets as well. And again, that's, those solutions I think do take longer to build out than an ag tech solution, because of course now you're dealing with regulatory agencies around food consumption. So that, that certainly puts some added risk into the growth of the business. But I think we're seeing a lot of activity around alternative proteins in particular. I think beef gets a lot of attention, kind of the carbon intensity of beef, but I think a lot of innovators are taking on areas of high carbon intensity diets. So, looking at companies that are reducing that carbon intensity. So you mentioned, Beth, at the outset, one of EDC's Cleantech Export Week, and we had a pitch session on Tuesday where we heard from Aspire Food Group, and they're doing some really interesting things within the alternative protein space with respect to crickets. And crickets aren't necessarily maybe a new alternative protein, but I think probably getting more attention, certainly in North America. But I think a couple areas where where Canada is very good in the ag space, maybe just more generally, is kind of bringing that credibility, and I think that's where some of the international companies that we're working with really appreciate the expertise that Canada can bring, because we're close to the farmer, we can be out in the field, and when I say close, I don't mean like in their offices. I'm talking about in the field where you can see the growing conditions, what the kind of what the variables are that the farmer is dealing with, or that the grower is dealing with. And so having innovators that are very familiar with what those challenges are brings a lot of credibility. And then the other thing that I think we're starting to see as well is combining some of that with finance. And I think if companies can figure out different models, revenue models to deploy, and that's really around kind of OpEx, making it an OpEx decision versus a capital intensive or a capital budget type of decision, then they tend to be getting a lot more traction as well. And then, my final point, I would say is just within the, kind of circular economy space, we are seeing innovation. I talk mostly about agriculture, but I think we're seeing a lot of innovation amongst so many different industries. Catriona mentioned automotive, and, I think about some of the discussions that we have with automotive companies and OEMs around the world, and the innovation that they're looking for. And, I think it's as coming back to my first point, is marrying up the interest from those companies that have the ability to help scale and to really kind of leverage what they're doing in this space, and being able to partner up Canadian companies. So I'll leave it there.
Great, thanks, Tammy. And some of those examples are pretty fascinating, especially from the agricultural sector. Neil, a question for you. Typically, forest companies are accustomed to managing large volumes. Bioproducts are a smaller volume market and higher value. This is a fundamental shift in a mindset when thinking about investing in bioproduct-related projects. What are your suggestions for attracting investment for these types of projects? And have you seen any examples of what works well?
Well, I think, thanks for the question, Beth. I think the first example is that our forestry member companies have already made some significant multi-million-dollar investments in, which Gurminder can attest to, in higher value-added product capacity, and things like CF and CNC and lignin. But if they were to do it all over again, I think they would have liked to have, brought in the market players a lot earlier. Focus on the value prop and to gain market traction a lot faster. So what we're hearing a lot from our member companies right now is to help them with a much earlier customer discovery process, and start to solidify the value propositions much earlier, and to develop the new products in collaboration with the market partners. And at the same time, also do much earlier techno-economic analysis, so that the value proposition works at both ends of the spectrum, of supply and the demand side. There's definitely opportunities for forestry companies to move up the value chain, and they can either do that themselves, or they can joint venture or collaborate with people in the value chain to do that, and that obviously gives them an increase in their value and helps offset the lower volumes. But also, what we're trying to do, at least initially, is start with some projects that are using relatively basic pulps and lignins at higher volumes, so that you're not necessarily getting the price kick right away, but you still have some volume. And examples of that would be, fibers in composites, which could be used in many large industries, but in particular the packaging industry, and/or lignin in asphalt, for instance, in the construction sector, which could essentially utilize all and more of Canadians' supply of lignin right now. So, so the idea here is that we can start with some basic products that still have volume, generate those partnerships, then they can start talking about, they can learn how to work with the market partners and collaborate, and we can start talking about more transformed products over time.
Great, thanks, Neil. And Catriona, I'm giving you a heads up. I'm going to ask one more question to all of the panelists. They don't need to answer, but if they have something to say in a response, I'd welcome that, because I see that there's a growing number of Q's and A's in the list. And Catriona, I want to make sure that we touch on those because I think there's some good questions and comments there. So for the panelists, and one or all of you can answer this. From the market perspective, where do you see the greatest opportunities, but also the greatest gaps in Canada to capture more value in the bioproducts value chain? And what are we not doing that we should be doing? Would anyone like to take a crack at that?
I can take a start. So I think I'll start with the challenges first, and some of them are obvious. So we can't compete against cheap oil and gas. Nature has done a great job of doing a separation in the oil and gas sector for them. So without kind of huge breakthroughs in capital efficiencies, you know, we're still going to need policy support and government help and subsidies, and that's really no different than EVs or solar or wind. And then, as has been mentioned by a few of you, Gurminder in particular, projects are typically complex and capital intensive and have long development cycles. So typically what you wouldn't call VC friendly, but I think we need to look at it in maybe a slightly different way. And you know, so Canada regrows as many trees as we harvest. So it's really a sustainable resource. And actually we're a world leader in forest management. We have almost 40% of the world's certified forests. So that gives us a good start. We got a great supply. But as has been mentioned, you know, the bioeconomy is big, it's complex. You look at the supply side, you get pulp, you know, in all its forms, fibers, CF, CNC, regenerated cellulose. You got lignin, you got sugars, you got transformation into, you know, building block chemicals and bioplastics and foams and composites. So on the supply side, you get all of that complexity. And on the demand side, you've got packaging, you got construction, you got automotive, you got chemicals, you got electronics, you name it, right? So it's a very, very complex ecosystem. And what we need to do is start some serious discussions about, you know, doing the customer discovery and the economic analysis that's necessary to find the right pathways, the most economical and market friendly and VC friendly, financial friendly pathways, and the right collaborations. And it's great to have Tammy and Shirley on the panel, because with Tammy, it's all about networking. It's all about finding the partners, and particularly the downstream partners, not likely going to be in Canada. They're going to be in the US or Europe. You know, networking and finding those partners is critical. And the same with finding the dollars. And again, that's where Shirley comes in. So having these kinds of conversations is critical. We've got to find a way to simplify and focus on the right pathways, find the right downstream partners, and then put together projects that can scale.
Great, thanks, Neil. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on Neil's comment around the funding, because I think that certainly is a challenge. You know, having the right incentive and regulatory frameworks in place to encourage the build out of specific sectors. And I think, Neil, you mentioned wind and solar, and you know, we certainly saw that in the early stage, and now you know, those are two sectors that I would say are certainly you know, mainstream, particularly from a funding and you know, financing point of view. They're, you know, kind of the funding of those or financing of those projects are now very much vanilla. So that's, you know, you kind of want to get to and strive to get to that point where you don't require incentives any longer. And so I would absolutely agree as those industries develop. But where I think we do need some alignment, particularly in Canada, is on the funding programs at both the federal and the provincial level. There is lots of funding available, at an early stage for companies that are, early stage innovators. But I think when, you get into the commercialization of those, projects, there is still a gap in that, kind of late stage commercialization and early stage commercialization. I'm not sure how to term it any better, but there is still a gap there. And so I think what we find is that because the funding is can be quite disjointed. Companies then end up looking to other markets to develop their projects. So, they're the EU or the US tend to be much more aggressive around wanting those projects in their markets. And so I think we do a great job at funding early stage companies, but when they get to the point of actually being world's class leaders, they're then looking to other markets. So I think there does tend to be a gap around that end piece.
Thanks, Tammy. Shirley, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I've got to learn how to use my mute button. Absolutely happy to have the comment. I think the challenge, there is that gap, right? So there is solid early stage funding. And if I'm talking from Cycle's perspective, as a Series B fund, we, as kind of started to allude to earlier, there's specific criteria that we're looking for. Right, so one, we need to know that the technology has been de-risked. So as a Series B investor, we don't take on technology risk. What we like to see is that there's actually commercial traction, that somebody's willing to take money out of their wallet and risk that dollar to try something new or innovative. So, getting that company to the place where somebody like Cycle, who's focused on knowing that the technology does what you say it can do, and having the ability to apply our network and expertise to apply our network and expertise to help grow the company is really where we think our expertise lies. And what we try to do is work with people just before us in the ecosystem, and then make sure we have the relationships going forward, that as the company matures, we can get them introduced to the players, sadly, whether they're within Canada or elsewhere, to help fund the continued growth of the organization. But it's the quintessential problem for many Canadian innovative companies is that gap. Now, there's lots of players, there's lots of initiatives that have been taken by the federal government, Vicky and others, to fund venture capital. But making sure we do it, that there is somebody throughout the venture capital ecosystem who can pull companies along is an important part of the equation.
Great. Thanks, Shirley. Gurminder, I don't know if you want to say anything or if we turn it over to Katrina. Oh, you're going to say something. Okay.
My panelists, the fellow panelists have captured it quite well, but I'll just finish off by saying I think the opportunity that is evolving here and increased awareness by consumers for sustainable materials, getting away from single-use plastics, all of these sustainable initiatives that have been announced by companies such as Coke, Pepsi, Nestle, Danone. These are really good initiatives with tangible goals and timelines, and that's a great opportunity for companies providing sustainable solutions to work with them to see how we can help them meet these targets that they've set out for themselves. So it's a great opportunity.
Thanks, Gurminder. Katriona, we have a mounting list of questions. Shall I turn it over to you to go through them?
Absolutely, thank you.
Right.
We do have a rising list of questions. And one of them actually was market-based. And I'm looking at it right now. It comes in from Jeff Passmore. And he's been sharing that, yes, government policy and programs is great in supporting R&D, but we need to engage the market, very much to Gurminder's point there. In terms of maybe domestic adoption, there's also been the comment around procurement programs and things like that, particularly in light of a green recovery. Now that we have a bioproduct market and we're developing that here, what can we do to support the uptake of solutions and more broadly, similar to the US program that they have there around US bio-based procurement. And I'd be wondering if anyone has any thoughts on that. Any ideas for incentives or procurement-based programs for Canada?
I think one of the shifts that we're seeing, again, this is somewhat related to COVID, and it is forecast to continue, is a shift from global to local supply chains. So there's some definite opportunities for companies such as ours and sort of some of our for colleagues in this space, where, again, to highlight just the personal protective equipment, where Canadian fiber was being produced in Canada, exported elsewhere, converted into PPE, and then brought back to Canada. Now we're actually segmenting that and actually trying to make these PPE equipments right here in Canada. So it's a great opportunity, again, whether it's related to COVID and it'll continue or not, but to basically incentivize bringing local supply chains and using Canadian-based bioproducts and using that as a demonstration tool to expand to other parts of the world. Again, our market is relatively small, so demonstrating technologies and their viability locally and to create the export market is an opportunity that we can take advantage of.
And I can just add to what Gurminder said from the point of view of PPE. I mean, we have at FP Innovations a program on 100% biodegradable masks that has been funded by NRCan, and the real focus there is not only going to 100% biodegradability, but also to be manufactured in Canada. And so it's a significant opportunity. It's just not clear to me if there's other opportunities in the biospace, for instance, for government procurement, because they typically tend to be, chemicals and plastics. So government policy obviously is very important, but I'm not sure that government procurement is going to be a big factor, other than in things like PPE.
Got it. Thank you, Neil. And another question here that's come in from Ravi. What's the most likely bioproduct for which Canada will become a leader? And I recognize this might be a hard question to answer because there's a number of different bioproducts that people are working on. So maybe it's what's commercial today and what do you see that's available on the market? Alpha. Maybe Shirley?
So how would I give that a whirl? So we actually do have several companies in our portfolio that are in the bioproduct space. People can take a look at NRChem, which uses municipal solid waste and it converts it to a syngas and other green chemicals. There's Aerex, which uses torrefaction to create on wood pellets to create a combustible. And so I think the important issue for all of these products is that product market fit. Like, truly, to Neil's point, understand early on why the customer is buying your product, or why the customer will buy the product. And I think it's really important to understand the risk aversion that many of these customers face. So, we have another portfolio company called Green Mantra, and it takes hard to recycle plastics and converts it into specialty chemicals. So not bio-based because we're staying in the petroleum space. But, as you talk to end customers, one of the risks that they articulate very clearly is, I would love to make the switch to a bio-based product or a fully recycled product. I just don't know if there's enough material out there to fulfill my need. So until we can give confidence to something as fundamental as that, the customer has a hard time making the switch in a meaningful way. You end up doing things like blending, so you can blend in some of these bio-based products or recycled products. But ultimately, you have to give the customer what the customer needs, and that's security of supply chain. It's competing at the same price or better, or providing an improved performance, something that they could never get from the existing, from the incumbent products. And that's part of where we've found people willing to take the risk, where you can say, this is your incumbent product, but this is what we can do for you. So using our product, you can increase the capacity of your existing assets, and therefore you avoid having to build out a new plant, as an example, or add more CapEx. So using OpEx, you can displace CapEx, but It's a really nuanced understanding of what the customer need fundamentally becomes. And I think when we can get to that level of understanding with the customer, then we have very viable products.
Mm-hmm. And Shirley, that somewhat speaks to, I guess, the investment risk as well, which is somewhat, coming through in the questions here. And I'd be curious to hear from the other panelists as well. How important do you judge biomass feedstock risk to investment in biofuels, biochemicals, and biomaterials? And maybe I can pass it around to Neil and Tammy and Gurminder as well for your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I'm happy to start on that one. EDC manages a Cleantech project finance envelope on behalf of the government to stand up first of kind Canadian technology projects, and a number of them that I see out west are certainly in the biofuel space. So the feedstock is critically important. If there's not sufficient feedstock and an ability to stress test that feedstock, both from a quantity and quality point of view, then the project isn't going to get off the ground. I mean, two of the really important elements would be feedstock and offtake, amongst other things within the project. But the feedstock is critically important. And I think sometimes, when I'm talking to developers about these types of projects, I often find they underplay a little bit the quality of feedstock. Particularly things like municipal waste, and there's a lot of inconsistencies in that. So I think when you are talking to various funders about that, there is an element where you do need to get funders comfortable with the quality of feedstock as well as the quantity.
And maybe I'll just touch upon that as well. So the quality and the nature of the feedstock is critically important. Again, a lot of the biomaterials that are being developed, in particular advanced biomaterials, are reliant on very precise inputs. For example, our process relies on kraft pulp. Some of the lignins that are being commercially developed rely on black liquor from a kraft pulp mill. So they're not really relying on wood from forestry, but they're relying on a derivative of wood from forestry. So the entire supply chain and the strength of that supply chain is critically important from extraction of the logs from the forest and the down processing of them, again, into lumber, into pulp, into lignin is critically important. And support of that is important as well. If that feedstock and the availability of these quality feedstocks goes away, then the opportunities that we're developing to commercialize is going to go away as well.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Neil, did you have a point that you wanted to share there? Or are you good?
I'm good. I think it was well covered. I just think the only thing I would add is that, it's although we do have 40% of the world's certified forests, the feedstock varies from province to province, and not only from the point of view of the type of feedstock, but the quality and the access to it. So that just adds to the overall complexity of the equation. So it just makes it more and more important that we start these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm looking here at a question from Doug Hooper, and this is for Beth. Beth, I'm going to put you on the spot. I hope that's okay. How is Government of Canada incorporating Canada's agricultural sector into the bioeconomy strategy?
So I don't know who posed that question, but at Natural Resources Canada, we focus more on forestry and the forest residue and feedstock. But I think we heard from Tammy that there were some excellent examples, well advanced in the agricultural sector. We do have a bioeconomy strategy for Canada. It is focused on forestry right now. That's been signed off by all jurisdictions in Canada. I would like, though, to see that broadened to incorporate the agricultural sector. That's something that I would like to see happen. So it's both forest and agriculture.
Thank you, Beth.
Catriona? Do you mind if I just add to Beth's comment there? So I think, you know, Ag Canada certainly does a lot, and that's, well, I shouldn't say a lot. Ag Canada is certainly participating in that space, and we do hear of some funding as well as challenges through Ag Canada. And I think probably, and I'm certainly no expert on what all of that is, but through the Clean Growth Hub, if the whoever posed that question, if they were interested, I would reach out to the Clean Growth Hub and ask that specific question of them, because the Clean Growth Hub is very good at, you know, kind of filtering through all of the various funding programs to see who's active and where different participants can get funding. The other place that I would say is probably a good place to touch with is the protein supercluster. So I think the, you know, as we're seeing the superclusters becoming more and more active and deploying funding, you know, depending on what the person is doing, the protein supercluster may very well be a good spot for them.
That's very true, Tammy. The protein supercluster is actively looking out for partners and networks as well to learn more about this as well. So great point. What advice would you give to a pre-revenue startup who is working in this space, who is developing a bioproduct and they're looking to commercialize? And maybe Gurminder, this is the opportunity for you to share some mentorship tips to a company that has asked the question.
I think that I'll go back to my comments at the beginning of the discussion, is to make sure that all of your stakeholders, in particular shareholders, your customers, and your team understand that, you know, it is going to take time. It's not overnight. So making sure that they have the patience, the persistence, and the perseverance, as I started, to undertake the process is key. It's just be active in the space. Again, it's the value proposition here that you're wanting to offer is multiply. So again, you want to have a technical value proposition, you want to have a commercial value proposition, you want to have a sustainability value proposition, and a safety proposition as well. So making sure that you're focused on all of the above is also key.
Awesome. And then, does anybody else have any other points there they'd like to share with this early stage startup?
Maybe I'll add a little bit there, Katrina. I'd say Gurminder's done a fantastic job. You know, that I always suggest that the earlier a company can interact with the customer, the better, because the customer can inform so much of the path that you ultimately take. And I think that's a little bit to what Neil was talking about earlier as well. You know, it's fabulous to work on the technology, but if the technology ends up in the creation of a product that doesn't quite have the feature set that a customer demands, then you almost have to go back to the drawing board. So far better to know what the customer is ultimately going to want and direct the research that way. Now, I'll be honest, sometimes the customer doesn't actually know what the customer wants or needs, or what the customer needs. But that's your job as an entrepreneur and an innovator, is to help try to tease that out. And you do that by having conversations and ultimately understanding what their pain points are. And understanding there's a difference between nice to haves and needs to have.
Absolutely.
Catriona, I'll just add to that in terms of being realistic around, you know, the, as Gurminder said, that, you know, the perseverance and persistence, that, you know, that's the length of time it will take to get to market, and that all requires funding. So I think, you know, often when I'm talking to companies in the pre-revenue stage, they get frustrated around their access to financing, and, you know, maybe some frustration with respect to what the banks are prepared or not prepared to do. And so I think the companies need to have maybe a realistic expectation around where each of the funders play and at what stage they can approach those funders or should approach those funders.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much. And it's true as well for what we do at Foresight, you know, connecting with the customers is key very early. But listen, you know, hearing from the experts on this panel who, you know, work in the bioeconomy space, they're the people to listen to. So thanks so much for that question. I have a question here that's coming from Joseph. How do you see demand for biochemicals emerging against biofuels in the wake of a rapid growth of renewables? Who I guess fundamentally asking what energy mix looks like in the future and things like that, and where biofuels and biochemicals play a role. I'd be curious to hear if anybody has any thoughts on that. Neil?
That's a really interesting question. I think that there's certainly been a lot of attention, and both Shirley and Tammy have mentioned biofuels. But I think we need to view biofuels as an interim step, and biochemicals as being sort of the Holy Grail from the point of view of higher value added product. But quite often, they're mixed together. So if you look at the Sweetwoods project in Europe, it's not only looking at creating higher value chemicals and foams and plastics, but there's also a biofuel component in there. So I think it's always part of the mix, but other than that, I really don't have too much more to add.
Let me try to add maybe a bit of color to that. I think in an effort to decarbonize and in an effort to move away from petrochemicals from an energy perspective, or petroleum as an energy perspective, and maybe it goes back to some of my earlier thesis, which is that the quantity of supply needs to be there, right? So from my perspective, undoubtedly solar is going to be the #1 displacer, followed by wind, but we're going to have other sources of energy to complement that in order to make up. If your goal is full displacement, then you gotta have a number of sources to do that. Do I think that that's totally feasible? I'm not sure that it's totally feasible, but the more supply we have, the more likely we may be able to make that transition. I think Neil raises a really good point, which is the value of chemicals. Given the quantity of supply that's available, what is the best use of the feedstock that we have, and where can we extract the most value? So I think we need to be very thoughtful about who will win on the renewables front, and where do we play in terms of the best bang for our buck.
Thank you, Shirley. And I know that BC government, the government of British Columbia, has an excellent publication that has a pyramid that showcases the opportunities around value-added products, from forestry, and how that relates to added value, and different volumes of that as well. Quite an interesting publication. I'm happy to share if you're interested, to the people who asked that question. And so we're coming to a close. And firstly, I want to say thank you to everybody for joining in and participating and asking questions, but also especially thank you to our panelists for being here today and sharing their perspective on the future of the Canadian bioeconomy. What's next? So we are going to be hosting, Natural Resources Canada and Foresight are going to be hosting a reverse pitch session to help close the loop on circular bioeconomy innovation. And what does that mean fundamentally? Well, we talked a lot about market today. We talked a lot about engaging with end users, engaging with manufacturers, as well as investors. Well, on December 3rd, we're hosting an event where corporate leaders and brand owners will be showcasing the type of bioproducts they're looking for. Now, if you're interested in connecting with these people, I'd highly suggest that you join the event, and you'll also hear from investors about what it takes to be able to invest in the bioeconomy and network with them as well. It will be a virtual event, and we can share the sign up with the group afterwards who have signed up for this webinar. So without further ado, I'd like to say thank you to everybody. And, Beth McNeil, do you have any final remarks?
I would just, we got some terrific key messages from our panelists today. And I'm really excited about the December 3rd event, 3rd and 4th, and let's build on today and what we heard in the networking that started. Thank you all to the panelists, and thank you for everyone who joined us.
Great. Thank you very much, Beth. And if you have any questions at all, please do get in touch with the project manager, Monica Lee. Her email's here at the end on the slide. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day. Bye.